Good morning, Grand Forks Central Room 305 biology students. Today we are starting a new chapter on classification. This is chapter 18, and this chapter goes along very well with genetics and evolution. So these three chapters, our last three chapters, are very, very intertwined, and I think you'll see that here. Normally we do a classification activity, and I'll just describe that to you. I didn't have a digital copy of it, left that back in the building, and so normally what I do is I have kids list 20 of their favorite tangible possessions, like an iPhone. I'm sure every kid puts their smartphone on there. Maybe it's your video game system. Maybe it's a favorite childhood toy. Could be some furniture, some of your clothing items, and then we classify those. So we take a list of 20 random ideas or objects, and then we try to group those. And it kind of helps us make sense of how this all works in nature. All right, so take a look at this animal here, very majestic creature, and you could ask people around Grand Forks or from Central or from North Dakota or from the United States or worldwide what this animal is, and you're going to get many different names. Mountain lion is probably a common one. Puma, cougar, those are probably the top three, but also they are known as panthers in certain parts of the country, catamounts, and others. I've heard accounts of this animal having over 80 names. Or this fish. This is our state fish, the northern pike, North Dakota state fish, and that's usually what we refer to them as, but they can also be called northern, they can be called pike, they can be called jackfish, gator, hammer handle, snot rocket because of their slime layer on them, many different names. So you can see how talking about nature can get very confusing. And here's a couple of reasons why. Problems with naming. Common names vary from place to place, as we looked at in the mountain lion and the northern pike. But there's also language barriers. There's many languages out there. You know, we speak English in our daily life typically, but you might speak Spanish at home. You might speak another language. If you're communicating with a person from another country, another part of the world, then those things become even more of a barrier. And some descriptions just don't fit creatures, like a jellyfish. A jellyfish isn't technically a fish. A seahorse is not even close to being a horse, right? So we have these names that don't always go together, and we got languages, and it becomes very confusing. And so we need a system in place. This is very much like in ninth grade, if you remember how we keep measurements consistent and shareable and able to communicate ideas to each other in terms of measuring. It's the what? The SI system, right? Meters, liters, grams. We have a very similar thing in biology. And it's called binomial nomenclature. And so hopefully you either have watched it already or you will watch it after this. You will watch a crash course on classification, and you will learn a little bit more about the Swedish botanist Carolus Linnaeus. And he developed this system back in the 1700s, and it's called binomial nomenclature. And if you think about the bases here, bi means two. Okay, nomenclature, naming, and we have two parts to the name. So you may be familiar with some of the scientific names of living things like human beings, Homo sapiens. That's two words, right? So a couple of rules to go along with this. And these are mainly when they're written, and I know it confuses high school kids. I see this when my field bio does their insect collections. I try to remind them, but it's easy to make a mistake. But the rules must be italicized. So we When you're on a computer, it's easy, just hit the button. If you're handwriting, it's a little bit different. So they also allow underlining of the word. The first word begins with a capital letter, just like you would write your name typically on an assignment or on a document. So in the case of human beings, homo, capital H-O-M-O. And then the second word is all lowercase, and typically this is descriptive in some way. It can be a physical description. Some organisms are named based on where they are living, or where they were first discovered, or maybe even who discovered them. So let's take a look at some of that. All right, we'll look at some bears as an example. So if we look at those pictures, I think I could have shown you these pictures had we been in a real class setting, and you guys probably would identify for sure a polar bear, and I would guess most people also would identify the lower bear, the grizzly bear, which is identified by its hump in its shoulder here as one thing. So the polar bear is called Ursus maritimus. Okay, and all bears belong to the genus called Ursus. So that first word is called the genus name. Okay, and we'll get into that a little more. There are actually 6 members of the Ursus group, or 6 bears, and the grizzly bear is called Ursus arctos. Okay, and in the case of the polar bear, Ursus maritimus, and the grizzly bear, Ursus arctos. Arctos and maritimus is the species name. Okay, and marine, if you think of the word marine biology, something like that, it refers to the sea. And so that describes the fact that the polar bear is actually considered not a land bear, but because it spends so much time hunting and swimming in the seas, sometimes it's referred to as an aquatic mammal. And arctos referring to the north or the Arctic, in terms of the grizzly bear being a more northern hemisphere, northern area species. And so that brings up a point of, what is a species? A species is a group of individuals that are capable of interbreeding, and here's the key, producing fertile offspring. So fertile means the offspring can have their own offspring. Okay. The opposite of fertile would be sterile, which means they are not able to reproduce. And a good example of that situation is a mule. Okay. A horse and a donkey can interbreed. Their offspring is called a mule, but mules cannot have their own babies. So that tells us that a horse and a donkey, while they can have offspring, they're not technically the same species. So that's kind of currently how it's defined. All right, the science of naming and grouping organisms is called systematics. Okay, it's the system. And the taxa are the organized groups that have a biological meaning. So kind of like you'd group your personal belongings. Maybe you have some school items, maybe you have some recreational items, clothing items, could be, things you've kept as a something from your childhood, and so on. Sorry, I was trying to think of a word and I couldn't think of it. All right, so here's how the Linnaean classification system is set up. We start at the, here it's kind of an upside down tree. The other video you're going to watch today has it flipped, but that's okay. So if we talk about general means very broad, and specific means like an exact one type of organism. And so we have kingdom. You've probably heard of most of these words. Phylum, class, order, family, genus, and then species. There's an easy way to remember it. This is the one I used when I was in high school biology. King Philip came over for green soup. Just a simple sentence that really makes no sense. But that helps you to remember the beginning letter of each of those steps, or the hierarchy of classification. So we have kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. Okay, King Philip came over for green soup. And every teacher has a different one. I know Mr. Barch has one that he uses, and it's all good. You can make up your own. Just in some way make sure you either use this one and review it, or come up with your own. All right, so here's looking at that same hierarchy, but breaking it down. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because I only have 15 minutes, but you can go through and take your time and look at, we're talking about this Bactrian camel, okay, and there it is by itself, but then look at each layer. It's genus, Camelus is camels, okay, and then as we go to each grouping, we have more creatures that belong to that group. Okay, you can see here in the order that the camel belongs to, we also see giraffes. We can see the class, the mammalian or mammals, we see a squirrel. And chordata, meaning it has a backbone, we see the additions of the reptiles. Okay, and so it makes a nice pyramid shape or a tree shape, and where we get more specific as we go down that classification system. Now, a couple problems. There are some problems with classifying like this. Just looking at similarities and differences. It doesn't always work. Luckily, today we do have many other things we can look at. We can look at DNA sequencing, and we can look at all these things that weren't possible back in the 1700s when this began. But if you look at this photo, some of you might be looking at that saying, what is it? Some of you might identify that as a barnacle. Okay, if you're a SpongeBob fan, you're familiar with the word barnacles. Sometimes looking at those is not enough. You know, early scientists of the 1700s may have looked at that and not consider it living at all, or they may have considered it a plant. You know, I remember as a kid learning about the sea sponge, and you know, that first time you hear a sea sponge is an animal and not a plant, it's kind of a confusing moment for you. But you guys can all probably think of some example there. All right. In addition to this video, make sure that you watch I gotta remember the title now. Make sure you watch the Crash Course video. There we go. I maybe am not quite as exciting as the speaker on there, or maybe you think that you'd rather listen to me than him. Whatever. I'd like you to watch both videos. I am not giving you any other work today, just because it is amazing outside and it's going to be a really nice day. So your homework is get outside and get some sunshine today, whether that's half an hour, 2 hours, whatever it can be. Okay, get outside. We'll do some sort of a Google form quiz on Wednesday with this voiceover and probably the next section. So we'll do a little more quiz action second part of the week, and you'll have till Sunday to do that. So, all right. Hopefully you're all doing well. We will try to Zoom a week from today, I think. I'm trying to Zoom every third class session. So if you can log on, it would be nice to see you guys and just feel like we're back in kind of a normal situation here. But yeah, hopefully you're all doing well, and have a good couple of days. We'll see you later.